Thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? Great. Well, welcome. I knew there would be a good crowd because the Rago crew always throws a great spread, but I didn't think so many people would actually stay for the lecture. So I'm pleased that you're all here, even if it's just to let your blood alcohol levels subside. So I want to thank David and Suzanne and Meredith and Miriam and all of the wonderful people here. This is a special place because they're not only experts, but they're good people. And that's something that I appreciate, and people I work with in the art world appreciate as well. I want to start by talking in general about art at auctions. And then we'll talk about, I said 5, but I might jump to a few more if you indulge me, but about 5 works that particularly caught my eye. And then hopefully we'll have a little time for questions afterwards. So let's talk about auctions. First, auctions are fun. And I say this because most art-going experiences, whether in galleries or museums or collectors' home, have a rather tight curatorial logic. Whether you're looking at Matisse drawings, abstract expressionist paintings, modernist drawings, one-person shows of a particular artist, there's a clarity and a logic in these experiences. All of that is very much out the window when you come to an auction hall. In comparison to those experiences, art auctions are more like the Wild West. There's never any clear logic. Works are presented willy-nilly. You don't know where they've come from. Somehow they show up on the walls, and there's something magical and exciting about the extraordinary juxtaposition that happens when you find works of art at an auction. I thought David was going to say willy-nilly. I was actually going to give you the definition. It's without direction or planning or haphazard, and the origin of willy-nilly is first used in 1608. It's an alteration of will I, nil I, or will ye, nil ye, or will he, nil he. Thank you for being so polite. I know you wanted to interject. I know you will. So next, auctions are poignant. To the scientific eye, we see paintings, drawings, and sculptures. But to the psychic soul, the works are dripping with karma, history, stories, and more. For example, let's look at this marvelous collage by Anne Ryan. Born in 1889, Anne Ryan was actually associated with the first generation of abstract expressionist painters. She was influenced by the great European collagist Kurt Schwitters. And there's a sense of creation and looseness in this work that I find a hallmark of abstract expressionism, which is also called action painting. But there is restraint in the intimacy of this work, and I would argue a countering to the big boy, masculine, expressive, drunken power of Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning. There's restraint, scale, and use of fabrics more associated with the feminine. Now, it's a little hard sometimes to get a sense of scale when the works are on the screen, so I invite you all to look very carefully at them. And just because it's right here in the room, it's this tiny little collage, right where almost the arrow of what looks to be a mangold print is pointing straight down. Beautiful, beautiful little work. And I'm going to come back to it later because it's one of my picks, and we'll talk a little more about if I had your money, how much I would pay for it. Because that wasn't my title, but I still kind of like it. But back to the psychic karma. Anne Ryan was friends with the abstract expressionist painter Robert Goodnow. Anne Ryan was exhibiting at Betty Parsons' gallery, one of the pioneering women dealers, exhibited Pollock and others, and Goodnow exhibited with Tibor Denage Gallery in New York in 1951. That year they both exhibited in the famous 9th Street Art Exhibition. The collage was a gift to Goodnow and remained with him for over 5 decades. Both artists were intimate and friendly with the New York school, so we can envision a dinner party with Mark Rothko, Willem de Kooning, Robert Motherwell, and others, drink in hand in front of this little work in Goodnow's home in the 1950s. We can further envision it in the 60s and 70s when Goodnow's work became somewhat out of favor. We can almost feel the difference in times as other art styles started to overcome abstract expressionism. And who knows what eyes feasted on this collage. So just when you think I can't get sappier, I'll get sappier. This little gem now resides in Bardo, in a liminal state, now dead to its former owner, soon to be reborn to a new owner who could be you. And this intimate collage can find a place in your library, and your children come home to visit and ask about this new work, and you tell them the story, and they tell their children the story, and tell them about Anne Ryan and Robert Goodnow and abstract expressionism, and one day the painting passes on again, moving through time in an unforeseen manner. Reminds me, anybody see that great movie, Artificial Intelligence, the Spielberg film? At the very end, this robot child is standing there with at the end of civilization, and art is like that. It'll stay around after we're all gone, and that's something special. It's seen a lot. So moving on, auctions can be an opportunity. You find something you love, you set a budget, and in the best case scenario, you end up purchasing the work. An even better case scenario, it sells for less than you hoped. And I'll tell a little story about such a scenario, and I'll move to the next painting. Well, we'll move back to that one soon. This is a painting by a woman, Janet Sobel, Russian-born woman, born in 1885, Russian Jewish, escaped the pogroms of Russia, came to the United States in the early part of the 20th century, and in the late 1930s, she's living with her family in Brighton Beach, in Brooklyn. She's a grandmother. Her sons are in the war. One of her sons goes to art school and comes home, and she looks at his paintings and she begins to paint on his paintings and everything else she can find, and creates this extraordinary body of work that her son introduces to two of the art world luminaries in the New York scene, John Dewey and Sidney Janis. And Sidney Janis immediately recognizes her as a great primitive, includes her in an important show of American, 4 centuries of American primitive painting, with Horace Pippin and Mother Moses, who wasn't even Grandmother Moses at that time. And she's this renowned primitive. And a year and a half later, he's following her work, and he says, Janet Sobel is no longer a primitive, she's a surrealist, because her work is shifting and changing, and it's starting to develop this floating figures and this all-over composition. And she begins to show at some of the great surrealist galleries, such as Hugo Gallery. The amazing thing is the work comes to the attention of surrealist dealer Peggy Guggenheim, who includes her in a group show called The Women in 1945, and gives her a solo show in 1946. Clement Greenberg, the noted art critic and historian and close friend of Jackson Pollock, later wrote in his memoirs about Sobel. And what he wrote was, back in 1944, Pollock had noticed one or two curious paintings shown at Peggy Guggenheim's by a primitive painter, Janet Sobel, who was and still is a housewife living in Brooklyn. Pollock and I myself admired these pictures rather furtively. They showed schematic little drawings of faces almost lost in a dense tracery of thin black lines lying over and under a mottled field of predominantly warm and translucent color. The effect, and it was the first really all-over one that I had seen since Toby's show came much later, was strangely pleasing. Well, Sobel has been acknowledged as an influence on Pollock, and even when they did the MoMA show, they pulled their Janet Sobel's out and had a little wall text. But this is one particular body of work that I know very, very well, and I was quite astonished about a year ago, following auctions. A small auction house in Chicago had a painting up by Janet Sobel. And I went to look at this, and the estimate on the painting was $2,000 to $4,000. It's this painting here. And this was the painting that Peggy Guggenheim had bought. And this was the painting that Clement Greenberg was referring to for the Pollock reference. And I had in my possession the letter that Greenberg wrote Sobel's son Saul, where he wrote, "Thank you for your note about your mother and her art. Yes, I did give Bill Rubin his lead, who's the Pollock scholar. I was impressed by the same painting independently. That Pollock was isn't it in Peggy Guggenheim's collection now?" So I'm looking at the painting that influenced Jackson Pollock's. It's up at an auction, $2,000 to $4,000. I've sold Sobel's work over the years to a point where major paintings were now over $100,000 to important museums and collectors. And I say, oh my goodness, what will this painting sell for? So I fly to Chicago, and in my mind, how deep am I going to go? I might pay $40,000 for this painting. I don't know if other people are going to find out about it. And the sale occurs, and I do end up buying the painting for, which included the 25% buyer's premium, $9,270. So the point is, and I'm sorry that I belabored it, is there are opportunities at auction if you have an eye and if you have a little bit of knowledge. Let's move on a little bit about what else auctions can be. Auctions can also be an education, because every single work of art that you see here is part of art history, and they're all an opportunity to go deeper, whether it's in color field painting or op art or New Hope School. They're all an open door to look and feel and learn and read. And I'm going to talk a little more about being a collector. I advise people to buy art, I advise people at auction, and I collect for myself. And I would argue that when you come to an auction house, you should be somewhat aware of why you're considering buying something. And I would argue that you're doing one or ideally a combination of the following three things. One is you're decorating. You see something that you want to live with. You could envision it in your home, on the wall. You want to live with it. But sometimes you're also a collector. You're someone like myself who collects black and white works on paper. I happen to particularly, it's not so much that I like drawings. I like works that have really strong formal black qualities. And it goes across all, from Stuart Davis to Willem de Kooning to Richard Pettibone and on. That's kind of my thing. So sometimes I'll have a collecting mind and see things that'll work as a collector. And as a collector, you don't always have to have it on the wall. That's kind of the definition of a collector, is when you start to put things in storage. And as an art dealer, we love collectors. We love collectors. Being limited to what you can put in your own home is just way, way too limiting. So we like storage areas. And the third role, the third way in which you can look at buying art is you can look at as an investment. Now, the fact that I'm old enough to remember a time when buying at auction is what dealers did. The general public never bought at auction. They didn't even know. It was like a dealer's market. And to the credit of the auction houses, they've developed a primary market among collectors, and it's done great things to the market. It's made it a little harder for dealers like myself to buy, but we are in a new world. As far as investing, there are a couple different thoughts about investment. I'm never big on the notion of art as an investment per se, but what I do believe is if you're going to pay a certain amount of money, and then let's not even put a number on it, that's more than you might even be comfortable with, you should feel that in a worst case scenario you can at least get your money back. You don't have to feel like you made a 10 or 20% return, but you just feel that it's solid, because sometimes you feel a little foolish if you paid tons of money for something, it turned out it's not that valuable. So that should be easy, right? You just go to your auction database and you see what things have sold for, and then it's real simple, right? Wrong. Nope. Come on. There we go. So this is a print by an artist, Yasuo Kuniyoshi. And I bring this up to serve as an example because in 1991, this print came up at Sotheby's Tokyo, and it was estimated, we won't do the yen because I think that's changed, but it was estimated $10,000 to $12,000 US dollars. And it sold for $118,605. This is in 1991. Well, looking at my database, knowing a little bit about this piece, I wanted to see for this talk what was the next most expensive price that the same print realized at auction. And I found it. It was from a Sotheby's sale in 1993, and it hammered at $3,450. So what's going on here? The story I heard is you have two Japanese businessmen sitting next to each other who were, neither of them was going to let the other guy win. It was, you know, you're not going to pay more than I am. And the two of them battled it out and came up with a price that really has no clear bearing on the market. But if you don't know some of this stuff, you might think all of a sudden that Kuniyoshi's now worth over $100,000. So the point is, you have to know, and you need to do a little research. I'm a big person about, advisors. It's what I do. But I think you'll also find the knowledgeable staff at Rago can advise you well also. They know a lot, and they're very generous with their information. Let's jump into the works of art I selected, and we can talk a little more about them and talk about some of the realities of these pieces and what they're estimated at, and how I see them. So let's go back to the Anne Ryan. So this is a tiny little thing. It's a tiny little thing, and it's estimated, it's 6 3/4 by 5 inches is the sheet size. It's estimated $5,000 to $7,000, and I guess the title is 5 Things I Would Buy If I Had Your Money. I would buy this. And what I'm going to do a little less of tonight is just be real specific about how much you should pay, because to be honest, if I had to be really exact, I might need to do or might want to do more research. Am I out of time yet?
No.
Sometimes I lose track. But what I would say is that this little piece is a gem, and that if someone was interested, it's worth at least double its high estimate, in my opinion, and it might do better than that. She had a wonderful little show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art where they had 23 works about 4 or 5 years ago. There's a lot of strong interest in women's role in abstract expressionism. She was part of that whole first generation I did a little bit of work. One of the things I do is I go through my own personal experience. I have dealer friends. I have a dealer friend, Aaron Payne, who has a wonderful gallery in Santa Fe. Aaron had a couple collages, and he's asking $23,000 for him. They're a little bigger than this, but I like this one better. So this really caught my eye, and in my opinion, it's worthy of further consideration. Let's move on. So next, there are two Fernand Léger works that are here. One of them is framed over here, and the other one's matted and in plastic on the back end. They definitely caught my eye. Léger is one of the great European modernists, and there's something about these works that is particularly appealing to me. There's a clarity of line. They're from 1929. They remind me a little bit of like even Le Corbusier. They have this precision, and there's also a kind of poignancy about these in that they were part of a collection of a gentleman named William Walter, and they're inscribed by Léger to him. So there's a personal history about these, and we can pause for a moment because both the Anne Ryan and the Léger works do bring up something that's important, which is a question of condition. The condition of a work of art does factor in, but one also needs to know how much of an issue surrounding condition is reparable and how much is not. And in the world of paper in particular, works that have some age to them, some foxing or some staining, can be cleaned very easily, actually, and it shouldn't be a strong factor in saying that you don't want to buy something. And I think both of these have been in collections for a long time, and both of them can use a little work, but I don't think it's daunting. And again, I'm not going to get really specific about what these pieces, if I was spending your money and you were going to buy, what I would tell you to pay. And if you don't mind, we'll back up for a second. If you are interested in buying a work of art at auction, I do think it's prudent to establish a budget, if only to realize that you ended up spending a lot more than you anticipated or budgeted, but you at least have a benchmark. And if you're a little, more prudent than I am, you can even stick to your budget. And that notion of a budget has a lot to do with kind of opportunity costs. For example, I'm going to go to recommend some Richard Pettibon pieces that the last thing I'll talk about, which are pieces that I'm interested in myself. I'm going to announce that to everyone. And part of that is I'm going to set a budget, and if I don't get them, I'll be, not happy. But this body of work, there will be other opportunities. That Janet Sobel that came up at auction, that was the one that Jackson Pollock saw, that was one I'd stretch for because that wasn't really replaceable. So sometimes you have to talk about that. The other thing is, if something's really good and you really love it, maybe it's hard to pay too much if you really, really love it. So these Légers are estimated $10,000 to $15,000, and I think if you really are interested in them, you should be prepared to pay a good bit more than that. I'll leave it at that, but who knows? But they're marvelous, and it's great to see them at the auction. And it's also a great example of how diverse the works here are. As an art dealer, my primary area of expertise is American modernism, and I tend to like things that are really abstract. I like the kind of work that's like all white or all black, or you'd say my kid can make that. But I like tough, minimal abstract paintings, and what I've found as I've gotten a bit older is that I'm more open to other things. And some of the works that I'm picking tonight actually are more in the field of realism. And this John Bader is a a photorealist masterpiece. It's just a great, great watercolor by an artist who's very well known for the diners that he's done, and this is just a stunning piece from 1991. Bader showed with O.K. Harris, who's associated with photorealism, and this is a great piece and estimated at 8 to 12. And unfortunately, most of the pieces that I'm recommending, I think are going to sell for well over the estimate, but you never know. It's like playing the lottery. You just, if you don't buy a ticket, you're not going to win. So, maybe some of these pieces, check your budget and even go in on the low side. Who knows? But I think that piece is another one that really caught my eye. The Don Nice painting you can see is really, really large. And I remember Don Nice's work from Holly Solomon Gallery in Soho in the 80s. And I also knew it because I had a friend whose mother was a great collector of American realism, and she owned a number of Don Nice's work. And I can't say I know a lot about Don Nice, but what I do know about him is that he's a really gifted realist who's taken as a subject matter the natural world with a tremendous amount of heart. He did a whole series of works up in the Hudson River, and he's very interested in ecology. And there's a term that I use sometimes as a dealer for works of art in auction, and I don't mean it in a despairing way, is that certain things are, we call them elephants, which is they're almost too big to have in your home. And this is almost one of them, unless you have a really high ceiling home. But sometimes these really, really large paintings are opportunities because people can't put them in their home, and you get a lot of bang for your buck. This piece here is called Walker Island Cove, Alaska, and again, I don't know a great deal about it, but I know that this was a particular place in Alaska, and he researched the state flowers and the state birds and all of these things that have a personal history, and there's something really, really special about it. There's also something with an homage to old master painting with these predellas. The whole center square is canvas, and then the bottom is a watercolor, and the top is drawing. But I just think it's very, very special. And this is one that's estimated 6,000 to 8,000, and I don't know what's going to happen with this one. This is a little more of a question mark. I would say there's less of a market for Don Nice, but I would argue that he's an important artist, and this is a piece that I also would stretch for. There's a large collection of Joseph Stella works in this auction that came through the artist, through family, to a private collection in Washington, D.C. And Joseph Stella was one of the great early American modernists, with Georgia O'Keeffe and Arthur Dove, Morrison Hartley, Charles Birchfield. And his market is not as strong as these other artists, although one of his greatest paintings, called Tree of My Life, sold for over $2 million many, many years ago. So it's kind of exciting that you can have the work of a great master for $600, $800, $1,000, and a lot of the drawings are in that price level. I think this lot, this is the one I chose, is estimated 600 to 800, and it's these 3 graphites on paper, and each of them is really small, 8 by 5, and you should look at it in person because there's just an extraordinary draftsmanship and detail, and the early American modernists were particularly known for their relationship with the natural world. They were interested in doing work that evoked the feelings they had when they looked at the world, and I think you can catch that with Stella. Again, an estimate of 600 to 800 for 3 pieces. You can't go wrong. They're wonderful pieces. They do need a little bit of conservation work, but they're beautiful, beautiful, intimate small works. And we end. No, we don't end. I got another piece too. Hold on. Let me. I might have missed one. Hold on. Well, I did miss one, so I'll just talk about it. The reason I included this, there are two woodcuts by Elizabeth Caldwell. And one of the reasons I wanted to include them is because I've never heard about Elizabeth Caldwell. I had no idea who she was. But they appealed to my eye, and they reminded me a little bit of B.J. Nordfeldt prints. And to my smug pleasure, when I read about her, I found that she was influenced by Nordfeldt. And these two little woodcuts, I don't know if Amy can find them, are lovely. And they're $800 to $1,200 for the two. And I was able to do a little bit of research, and that's the beautiful thing about the internet now. You just Google Elizabeth Caldwell, and you find out that she's remembered for her watercolors, etchings, and woodcuts. Born in the southern Michigan town of Bronson in 1881, she studied at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and learned Japanese woodcut techniques from B.J. Nordfeldt in his studio in the South Side neighborhood of Chicago. And then a little bit further, there are art databases, and what I found was that in 2009, one of these, the winter scene, the little birds on the wire, that was estimated $1,000 to $1,500, and that one alone sold for $1,000. So that's a little bit of an indicator, and that's, to me, also part of the excitement and the education of auction, in that you see something that you have no idea what it is, and it catches your eye, and you pursue it, and you're interested, and I think that's great. So I'm going to end with this Raymond Pettibon, who's a fascinating kind of more of a pop artist, and Pettibon's major works have sold for a lot of money at auction, over $500,000. Here at Rago, there's been a number of these wonderful Pettibons, and they've really exceeded estimates very often. Oftentimes there's been estimates of 8 to 10,000, and they've sold for 30, 40, 50,000. And I spoke earlier that as a collector, I have this thing for black and white. So in looking at the number of Pettibons, I think you would see that these two that I picked, and the one on the one with the man in the glasses, that has the F word, is the darkest of the, has the most black, and it really appeals to me. That's the one I like the most. And as far as, we can talk a little bit about, collecting for myself. How do I want to go about this? And I already said that if someone else buys it, I'm happy. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to pay, but, whatever I decide, I'm going to decide. But they're two small works, and I'm thinking that maybe I can do okay with these because the subject matter is a little tough, and because I like the black formal qualities. Other people might be off-put by the profanity. So we will see. But I think Raymond Pettibon is an important artist, and certainly an artist that I would be willing to stretch for. So those are my 5+ works of art that I would buy if I had your money. And if we have a few extra minutes, I can entertain any questions. Go ahead. I can't hear you. We'll give you 30 more seconds, and then oh, there's a question. Oh, no, I can't tell you a whole lot more about Pettibon. What I can tell you is that he was an artist who was interested in a certain type of appropriation. He was looking at pop culture and redoing it, and that there's a kind of a comic book interest, similar to people like Roy Lichtenstein. But one of the beauties of enjoying things formally, which I do, is sometimes I don't need to know as much about that And sometimes the learning about the artist actually comes after the work of art. So I'm a little bit of a formalist in that way, and I'll make sure I know a little more about the market, so I'm not silly with my acquisition. But I feel like if I end up with it, I have a lot of time to get to know more about this artist. Yes, sir.
When you buy an auction, would you recommend working with an art advisor?
If you were to buy at auction, should you work with an art advisor? I would say it can definitely help you in many, many ways, particularly if you have a project. And by a project, I mean, let's say you want to collect, or if you want to actually put art in your home that has a certain kind of logic, or because the advisor can do a number of things. Not only can they advise you on the works at auction, but they can say, you know, this is a great piece, but there's also one here at this gallery, and be as open as possible about the possibilities. They can also advise on condition and other things. So I think that's good. It's not necessary. One of the nice things about good auction houses like this one is you can get good advice for free. But I think if you were deciding to spend a more substantial amount of money and you really wanted to be more serious and a little more ongoing with a collecting project, an art advisor would be well advised. Yes?
You used to do the Works on Paper show, correct?
I used to do the Works on Paper show many years ago.
Amazing pair of drawings that I would love to walk with you when I was working as a museum curator. I'm not remember the artist's name, I'll try and remember. I'm an expert in early modernism as well. So anyway, it was wonderful.
Okay, if you can describe them, I might know.
Great to agree with that. I'm now a private art consultant, and I have to say, to Ted and John, your answer, that how do you find a good art project that is fraught with pitfalls, and there are a lot of those songs people out there all the time, and prestige things, someone with a name,
Yeah, I think there's truth to that, but it's like any other business. You're saying that there's a lot of art advisors who might not serve you well, and there is a whole world of I call it sheep buying. You buy what everybody else is buying, and sometimes it's not the best way. But it's like anything else. You trust your instincts. Talk to a few people, get recommendations, and you end up following your instincts about what makes sense, and I think you end up making a good choice. Good. Yes?
In terms of sheep buying, would you say that any parts of the market are overvalued right now, or is any part of the market you might avoid?
Well, you might be asking the wrong person, because I'm more of a historically rooted art dealer. And because of that, I don't think I have really necessarily accurate opinions about the whole contemporary art market, but I do look at it agog. I don't think I know the definition. I don't think I have that one in my Webster's. I see these limited edition photographs, selling for $450,000. These big, and I look at what else you could buy for $450,000. You can buy an Arthur Dove watercolor that's so extraordinary. So I do think that there are parts of the contemporary market that I think you have to be really careful about. There's one of the beauties of buying more historically is there's been more time for the work of art to find its place, to have its ups and downs. Something that's only been around for 10 years, it's a little harder to say. But on the other hand, if you pick a winner, you're in good shape. So I can't be specific about what I think is overpriced or overvalued. I think the contemporary market at auction is very self-serving, and it's a little hard to know what's exactly right. So, and maybe that's one of the reasons, and I'm also just a little old school when I look at things that have a little more history, as you can see from the pieces I chose. I think there's one other question. Yes? Yeah, that's a good question. When you look at an abstract piece for the first time, how do you know? You know, it's like I have a friend who's in the jewelry business, and he can look at a handful of diamonds, and he can tell me this one, this one, this one. I have no clue what he's saying, how he knows, and a lot of that is from experience. It's a connoisseurship. You develop an eye and a sensitivity. So I'm also going to answer that in an absolutely opposite manner and say that sometimes if you just go up to something as open as possible, you just open yourself up to it and you feel it and you experience it and you see how does it work, and you start with that, and if there's something there, then you pursue it. You Google the artist, you see where there are other pieces. Maybe you don't buy that the first time. Maybe that's a note to self. I want to know more about this. But I do think that there's like a paradox with abstraction. On one hand, people don't get it, and I think they create a self-imposed barrier. In fact, what is there not to get? There it is, right? But the reason we don't get it is because we expect something else. What are you expecting? You're expecting. Well, there was the 20th century is a great object lesson for that, because you have people like Kandinsky in the early part of the 20th century who writes books like The Spiritual in Art, and he says that all of the art that's come before basically has to do with, I think his word was mimesis, or copying. So you do a painting and you're doing a painting of a flower or of a still life or of a history scene, but all of the art is a picture of something else. In some form, it's representational. He goes, I want to create an art that's non-objective. I want art to, when I look at a work of art, I want it to work on me like when I listen to music. I want the colors to, I think he says, like, pluck the strings of the keyboard of my soul. I want to feel the pure orange. I want to experience the shape. I don't want it to be something in a natural world. I want the purity and the primacy of this direct perceptual involvement. And therein we have the revolution of abstraction in the 20th century. And I think once you kind of open yourself to that, you'll have a lot more fun looking at art. So we'll leave it at that. You've all been really patient and a great audience. Thank you so much. And I'm around if you have any other questions. Thank you.